Yeah, so I'm originally from Germany, and I'm probably you're going to experience that with my accent. So it's easily detectable from the city of Munich. And yeah, grew up in a little house close to the city center, and with family intergenerational. It was actually with my parents, my sister, and also my grandmother. And I kind of early on, I don't know if I really had a dream to become an architect. My family is much more like my father is a veterinarian, my sister is a veterinarian, my mother is a nurse. So I was a little bit more in that kind of world. But somehow at some point I thought it would be really cool to become a car designer. And I think that's maybe the German thing, right? Living in a city where BMW was born, that was kind of in always conversations with kind of friends and colleagues and so on. But then somebody told me, it's like, by the way, when you're a car designer, you're probably going to be just stuck on designing a wheel for 1 year. And then the next year, you maybe do the little kind of draw thingy that you do just to control the heat and the cold.
Yeah.
And architecture would be interesting. And then I looked into interior architecture, and then somebody else told me, it's like when you do interior, you also, again, just locked into that. Just do the whole thing, because then you can do buildings and also interior. So it was kind of like an interesting advice that came more out of kind of product design and maybe having a little bit more responsibility and control over what I do. And then very quickly, when I tapped into what architecture really means, I became very aware that there are so many things that you could do so much better. And then that became really the driver, where it was like, look at these buildings. Why are they so boring? Why doesn't this feel great when I'm here? And I became almost an architect out of a critique of the environments that I experienced in my early years.
That's fascinating. So at what age was sort of this happening? I don't know how it works in Germany. I mean, in the United States, I'm sure you know this, but in high school, you have to choose a college. That's like the typical route. You have to choose a major, and that's like the big deciding point for, like 17-year-olds.
Yeah, so in Germany, it's good question. I mean, I went a little bit like an unusual way because I went through like different types of schools to get to the opportunity to do architecture. You do have to have a certain level of education in your school, and then you're permitted to do it. But I would think with maybe 18, I was pretty invested in it.
Yeah.
And I think that I actually started studying architecture was 19 or so. So quite early.
Gotcha. So you end up going to like basically the equivalent of college, I guess, for architecture, right? And I assume you finished the program and you went on to practice. Were there any surprises when you got to architecture school or when you got into the profession? Yeah,
so I always say, jokingly, but half jokingly, that I went to the worst architecture school of Germany, which was like in Munich, right? You have the technical university, which is like awesome, but it's still technical. I went to the University of Applied Science, or so it's like called. So it's like a little bit lower. And I came in with enthusiasm. And the first lecture was, it's all about math. It's all about structural engineering. And don't think that you can become too creative.
Wow.
That was literally
wow.
the first.
That's pretty different from who you are.
What a dream killer.
Total dream killer. But then I was also, and this is actually really, really important and interesting. I really struggled at the beginning because I'm actually math oriented in terms of my talent. So I was good in this, but I was not good at all in terms of any creative thinking and designing. Because I thought that there are like all of these kind of logics, and with the logics, you can figure it out what to do. But I mean, architecture is very different, right? There's like one avenue that is about logic. The other avenue, it's about free thinking, about poetry, about atmosphere, about emotions, right? And I did not have that part in my education or in my life or in my capabilities. And I was very lucky. There was a new professor. She came into the university, Heike Büttner. She came from Berlin, and she was thinking so radically different. And all of my colleagues, my student colleagues, were like, hey, Matthias, you should check it out. She's awesome. And so I signed up for her studio, It was incredible challenging with her. And then she organized a summer school in Venice. And I was like, oh, this sounds super cool. 3 weeks in Venice and enjoying the city and learning more about architecture that I was really eager to learn. And so I applied, and she said no.
Oh, no. Why not?
Why?
And I was like, oh my God, no, I really, really want to go. It was like, no, Matthias, I don't think you're ready for it because you're not free enough in your thinking. There's going to be a very free-spirited event, kind of teaching session. Mm-hmm. There are going to be professors from Cooper Union, and I want to make sure that you're not just wasting your money. And I was like, no, I have to be there, And then she was like, okay, Matthias, you can go if you promise me that you do not give up. And I was like, deal. So I go there with all of the other students, and the first day is like, okay, the topic we're going to work on, it's called transient space. As a German, already like, what the hell is transient? What is a transient space? It was just totally mind-blowing, and we were all struggling, and we had no idea what we were talking about. Anyway, then we had these amazing critiques coming in. The first one was Enrique Morales, who passed a few years later, but this amazing architect out of Spain. Then we had a gentleman, Van Berg, I think he was Dutch. And then already at the third week, people just basically trailed off because it was beautiful weather, great food, Lido close by, and why should you sit in a sweaty studio not understanding what transient space is? So they all gave up except me because I promised them. And the last one was Riccardo Scofidio. Oh. And he showed up, and I was the only one still standing in the studio, working day and night, making models and models and models. And he was basically my private tutor for 1 week. And I was there like in I still remember like tank top. It was so hard and doing these things, but being so eager to understand what they tried to teach us. And I built like models overnight and always discussed new things with him. And then when he left, I basically said I would love to do an internship with him in New York. And he said, like, look, we're such a small studio. There's so many people applying. It's kind of unlikely, but give me your number and just apply, right? So I gave him my number. I went back to Munich and I prepared my application. But before I was done with my application, I got a call on my voicemail and at home. And so I come home and I press the thing, and it said, hello, this is Riccardo Scofidio. If you still want to work for us, come to New York on Monday. Goodbye. And I packed my things, I booked my ticket, I flew to New York. And then I was basically like, I stopped my study. I just worked for Dilla Scofidio at that time. It was Liz, Rick, Paul Lewis, and myself. So we were 4 people in the studio on Astor Place. Wow. And I worked basically day and night just on models and on basically just supporting them, right? Because I still was not really intellectually savvy, but I was really, really just eager and fast and very handy. And so we worked on the Gifu Prefection kind of apartment building. We worked on an exhibition in Milan, and there were like all of these things. I became really good friend with Paul Lewis, who then founded LTL. Right. He took me to Princeton to lectures, and I mean, it was like this amazing, mind-blowing experience. Now suddenly being in the city of New York with Dilla Scofidio, when they're still very artistic, so it was not really yet a truly architectural firm. Mm-hmm. They were writing the book Flesh, I believe, if I remember correctly, and that basically changed everything. Right, so I had suddenly like an experience to an incredible progressive firm. I was in New York, exposed to all of these other things. So what then happened to me is I came back to Munich, to my super conservative math-oriented school, and nobody understood anymore what I was doing. And then I finished basically my class the last year. We had to do a kind of a semi-academic design kind of presentation. And in Germany, you get grades, which are basically 1 is great, and 6 is the worst, and 3 is like, why. So they gave me a 3.
Oh, goodness.
They gave me a 3, which I did like a booklet presentation and big models and so on. And then I was like, okay, well, I prove you guys wrong. I used my final presentation and I applied in a couple of firms in Germany. And I applied also with Peter Eisenman, which was on my list of architects I would like to work for. And Peter said yes. And then my first job was with Peter Eisenman in New York.
That is a crazy story. See, and all because you promised to stick through the program in Italy.
Absolutely. And I think this is, in architecture, I think it's really the meta theme. It's like, don't give up, right? Because it is such a tough, very complex profession. And you really have to be resilient with a lot of different influences and challenges and so on. But when you do it, you can really pull through and grow and learn and do really amazing things. But if you give up, there's so many other jobs where you can make much more money with much less effort. And then I think that's a much easier choice then.
Do you sometimes think about where would you be at this moment if you did not sign up for that program in Venice?
I would definitely still be in Germany.
Oh, yeah?
I would be incredibly depressed. What would I do? I probably would work for the government at this point as a planner, as somebody who just stamps drawings when they come from other architects.
Oh, God.
I'm glad that's not the case. That'd be a waste of talent right there. So when you returned to Germany, when you're working for... I guess they weren't even DS+R at that point. It was just the two of them, sort of, right?
It was just DS.
Yeah. DS, yeah. Like, at that time in the scene, was it clear that they were, rising stars, or did you have an understanding of the weight that they would potentially carry in the future in the profession, or was that not really known yet?
Yeah, I mean, in Germany, nobody knew them at all. But because Heike Bittner, the professor, she was very connected to Cooper Union. So she was like, oh my God, these ones are the rock stars. They're really the future. So she introduced them to the German world, basically through her enthusiasm and knowledge. And but also being in New York, right? Everyone looked at them. They were like, they're really cool, but they're no architects. They're like either architects or artists and so on. And was actually really interesting. They had the same conversation internally. They were still not really sure which avenue they were going. And even when they thought about what they should build, like doing an exhibition or an installation, is it an architectural scope or was it a artist scope, which is very different in terms of how you even think about this financially. Yeah. And it was interesting. At some point, they made the decision they're architects, and that's when they became really successful. So there was this kind of moment of cleansing, kind of, and positioning for them. That's super fascinating. And for all of these trips to New York, was this like your first time, visiting the city or living in the city? Visiting, not. So I was before. I was fortunate that. My parents and my family historically was very worldly. My grandmother, she studied in Paris and in London, right, like in 1905 or so. Oh, wow. So there were like these great stories. My great-grandfather was born in Rio. My grandmother was actually born in Cairo, right? So our family always had this kind of like, somehow during your life, you live in different places. And so that was always part of what I aspired to. And then I had this, I did like a trip to America at some point. I have to remember when I was, for 3 months. And I must have studied already architecture. Yeah, so that was in 1989. Oh my God. And lots of fun stories I can tell you about this trip. But the special thing was I went first to LA. I looked at all the Frank Lloyd Wright and Schindler and Kiesler houses, which was super exciting. Then went to Hawaii, just hung out there on the beach for a little bit. Then went back to California, just driving around Route Number 1 for like 3 weeks. And then coming to New York. And then in New York, I had 10 days and it just blew me away. I mean, I just fall in love with the city and I was like, oh, this is a place I want to experience again. So that was like the beginning for me, at least, to aspire to be here for a period of time. I see. And then as soon that voicemail was there on the answering machine. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
it was the destiny. So I also understand at some point that you worked at OMA in Rotterdam, right?
Yeah, and so the fun stories continue. So I worked for Peter Eisenman, and that was 1995, where America architecture was just like in the trenches, right? Peter Eisenman just went bankrupt just before all of these companies failed because you had this huge crisis. And even like fun stories, there were no light bulbs in the office, so I had to buy my own light bulb, and then I put it in, and then I leave for lunch, and then my light bulb was gone, and then I look around, and actually Peter took it. He took my light bulb, and it was a very, very like minor or maybe not even paid the first professional experience that I got. But also they are like very intellectually stimulating. Peter was just like, read this book, I have this book, go with me to the lecture, and so on. We became really, really close because it was kind of a office that had to reboot and restart, and I was just enthusiastic to be there, and everyone else was like semi-depressed what was it's happening right now in architecture. But then when I ran out of money, basically, and there was actually an interesting time, Peter had a lot of lectures about criticizing Rem Koolhaas and Herzog de Meuron, talking about what is form, what is infrastructure. And he had like this all very interesting positioning kind of conversations. And then I basically said, like, Peter, I have to move on, and because I have to earn some money, and I think I have to go back to Europe. And then he was like, oh, okay, so where you want to work? I was like, well, I want to work with Rem Koolhaas. And then he was like, oh, really? For Rem? Did you already apply there? I was like, no, I'm in the process. I'm sending things today. I was like, okay, hold on. Take out his telephone. It's like, hey, Rem? Hey, it's Peter. There's this crazy German. He's applying at your studio. Hire him. All right? Matthias is his name. Click. So I fly to Rotterdam, get the private, let's say, application, how you interview with Rem, which was also really fun because I arrived there to talk to him in the morning at 9 o'clock. I get there and they're like, oh, Rem is not here yet, but don't worry, just wait a little bit. After 1 hour, somebody was like, yeah, Rem is here now, but he has like other things to do. Do you have enough time? Can you wait? I was like, yeah, no problem. I can wait forever. And then at 3 o'clock, Rem comes in. It's like, so you're waiting for me. Do you still have time? It's like, yeah, no problem. It's like, okay, I'm back later. Gone again. At 5 o'clock, he comes in again. And then he was like, oh, okay, so you work for Peter. What you want to do? What's your talent? And so on. So I showed him the project. And then he was like, so when could you start work? I was like, now. And he was like, really? Okay, come with me. So we go into the big studio, and he's like, hey, everyone, this is Matthias Hollwich. He's a talented architect, just worked for Peter Eisenman, joining us now. He's joining the Universal headquarter team. Make sure that he can fly with everyone to LA on Monday. See you guys, Friday evening.
Oh, God.
And then he ran off. Everyone was like, oh, okay, great. More help. Come. So I already did an all-nighter with them, basically. And then on Monday morning, I had my negotiation about my employment, and my flight was booked at noon. So I still remember this gentleman's name was Wim Stortel. He was sitting there and was like, okay, Rem hired me on Friday. I was like, oh, okay. Did you guys talk about salary? It's like, no. Okay. What's your experience? It's like, yeah, well, graduated like 1 year ago, worked for the Video, worked for Peter Eisenman, and ready now to work on the Universal headquarters. And then I saw that like sweat kind of build, and he was like very unsure what was going on. And it was like, and then I actually have to take this train in 30 minutes because I have to get to the airport. I have to fly to LA. And then he wrote a number onto the paper, turned it around, moved it to me. And I saw the number. I was like, oh my God, yes. And then I was like, yeah, that should be okay.
Yeah, that's okay, I guess.
It's okay. It's okay. I was like, oh my God, I make money again. And then I flew to LA.
That is a crazy story. I mean, the pace of all those events is insane, really.
Yeah, and I think I was fortunate that I was just I didn't have student loans, right? I could afford to pay a little bit for free. And I was super flexible. I was just like, yeah, whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Student loans, that's a big one. Yeah, it's a big factor for sure. So how long did you work at OMA and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so my plan was to be there for 1 year. Turned out to be 3 years. It was an incredible, inspiring sweatshop where I worked every day, right? Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, from the morning at 9:30 till midnight. Wow. And in the 3 years, I went out to Amsterdam, which is 1 hour by train, once, because we were just in the studio, work. But it was so exciting and so inspiring because that was the moment where actually OMA really kind of created the foundation of what the firm is now. Before there was very little, like the Kunsthalle was built and then a couple of houses and so on, but nothing really substantial. And then we had the Universal Headquarter Commission, which unfortunately didn't get built, but it was also part of the whole LA, kind of the theme park reinvention. Then I worked on Casa de la Musica, which got built right in Porto. I worked on the Dutch Embassy that got built. I worked on IIT Campus Center, where I was also partially project manager. After 1 year with REM, I already ran this crazy building for a while. So it was this kind of total awakening of the firm, and REM was super energized and pumped that really reality was coming into the firm. And then it was also interesting because like the majority of people were not Dutch, right? So we're all international. Nobody had family. Nobody had anything else to do than work. So we became really, really tight community. And then it's like the really fun part is, oh no.
Oh, I recognize that.
Those.
Yeah. This is the fire marshal, right? The drill?
Yes, it's a fire drill.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
No, this is okay.
Out.
I remember these happening. They would happen pretty often.
Yeah, you got to.
All the time here.
It's great. Perfect. This is This is a New York recording.
There we go. Okay. Perfect. But yes, just to go back. So this was a super energetic time, right, at OMA. And all the people who kind of were working there, like 85 or 90% were not Dutch, right? So we don't have family. We were all just there for REM and for this incredible work. And we became all super close. And then also that was like the brewing factory of incredible talents. Right, so Bjarke was sitting there next to me, and Julien de Smith, who then later on created Plot, and then Bjarke did Big. Right, then there was Joshua Ramis from Rex, was actually my roommate for many years. And we always cycled together back home to the Kohlehafen, and then we picked up our breakfast at the fuel station. We went to the gym from time to time together. Then there was also Dan Wood and Amal were there.
Oh, yeah.
Min Cho was there out of now in Korea. Ole Sharon was there. Right, so all of these super interesting people working there for REM. And of course, we didn't know what their career is going to be later on, but just that kind of energy that was there. And it was kind of competitive. Fernando Romero was also there.
Oh, yeah.
So it was kind of competitive, but also we like to inspire each other, so that there were a lot of dialogues, and we showed presentations and what we were doing. But then everyone, of course, tried to win and get more attention from REM and get a bigger project and so on. But it was really incredible. For me, that was the school that I really went through in the end. It's like 3 years with REM.
It certainly sounds like it. I mean, that's amazing to have all those different people, because they've all gone to become very successful, and they're all actually, some of them are quite different from each other in terms of the focuses and what they do now. Yeah,
absolutely. And for example, with Fernando Romero, you saw, I mean, his kind of sculptural talent. I mean, I've never seen anyone beside later on here, actually here in the firm, Robert May is on the same level of being incredible talented, of crafting very quickly these incredible forms. But then you had like Joshua Ramis, right, who was always a little bit more on the strategic level and the kind of how you kind of lead a client towards something meaningful, even if the client has not really understood yet what they want. And then you had Dan Wood, a little bit more playful, right? So you saw these things, and now when you look at their career, that's kind of what they really became. And that's really, was super exciting.
That's fascinating. Let me ask you, this is a specific question from that. If you had to kind of self-analyze yourself, like how would you describe your trajectory, from that time to now, as you kind of describe these different people?
I think I was always the one, I think also in my school and later on, I was always a really, really hard worker. And nothing came easy to me, but I knew that with pure force, or I learned that with pure force, I get there. And for me then actually later on was very important that I took a breather almost, because after OMA, I went actually to Hong Kong to help to start the office in Asia. At that time with a company which was called RAD, that's right. But then I went to Zurich to teach at ETH, and I intentionally didn't start an architecture office. I did first a internet company, which was called eTech. Then I did a lot of concept engineering. And for me, that was actually a moment where I decided that I need to just first reboot so that I do not repeat REM. And that was actually a really interesting journey where it took some time. And then after a few years, I started to do competitions, and I started slowly but surely coming back to architecture. But that was something where I think for me it was important that I don't just follow into his footsteps, find other elements of inspiration to bring into my thinking. And that is actually for me the result now. It's really like there's a OMA way of thinking, a little bit of formalism that came from Peter Eisenman, which you actually see in some of the projects at that time. That I put that into Casa de la Musica, because with Peter Eisenman it was like very shapy and twisty and so on. And then also maybe Haus die Schenkung, which was a concept we developed for a building next to the Dutch embassy in Berlin. But then the more strategic thinking, right? At OMA, we were like design. Now I'm like, okay, what is the program? What is the analysis? Where we can save money? How do we topologically maybe change it? So a lot of things that now the firm is doing here at HWKN is derived out of the mix of an architectural kind of experience, plus a little bit more strategic thinking, business thinking. And I think that's also kind of the unique sales proposition that we have at this point.
It's very interesting that you decided to take a break because I feel like a lot of people, they work at great firms, they really get into that firm's way of thinking, and then they just start their office and kind of carry that on with them, right? But the fact that you are like, hey, you know what, I gotta kind of find my own voice. Like, I got great experience, but I gotta create my own voice, and I need a break to understand what I need to do. I think it's a very, it's not brave or courageous, but it takes some balls to do that, and not just, like, just take the easy way in, I feel.
Right.
So it's very fascinating to me that you did that.
Yeah, and also, I'm just like such a curious person about so many different things, right? And that really allowed me then the time. But the 3 years with REM were just like 10 years in a regular firm,
right?
And that just really helped me to, just to be free again. Maybe before I was always free by just moving from one place to the other one, and then that maybe was just like an intellectual freedom. And also you have to think about 2001. Or 2000, right? Internet actually emerged, and so many people were like, "Oh, what can we do as architects, maybe in that space?" And so when I created eTech, it was all about co-creation of single-family homes through the internet. and we developed actually the software. We got sponsored by the Museum for Technology out of Karlsruhe, and I think there were other drivers, and I feel like if I would be the same age now, I would look into the metaverse, right? Because it's such an interesting thing that nobody else really understands yet, and as a young person, I would be quite naturally drawn to it. So at that time, that was also part of it, I believe, that there were like interesting new things to explore.
One last question: with your time at OMA, did you really work 7 days a week for, like, you must have taken a bunch of holidays in that time? No, I went, sometimes I had a relationship in Munich that was very challenging after a while. So I sometimes left on Friday and then I came back on Sunday. Oh, here we go.
There we go again.
I knew it was going to come back.
I know.
I was waiting for it, actually.
They love their voice. They're doing this a couple of times.
Yeah. They do these things, but it's like no one's paying attention, man.
Well, until the day there's a big fire, and
and no one's going to pay attention.
No one's going to pay attention.
Yeah.
So now hopefully they're quiet again. So, sorry, what was the question?
Well, so no, just about the 7 days a week working.
Oh yes. No, so I had a relation. So when I was doing the whole time with OMA, I literally worked every day, except I took a few trips to Munich because I had a relationship there, but no holidays, nothing. There was one moment when I think I cut myself with like a cutter, and it didn't heal. And I went to the doctor and he looked at me. It's like, okay, so what do you do, architect? Who you work for? Rem Koolhaas. All right, your body is on an edge. I give you the strict order to relax for 4 days so that my body could recover. Now it was amazing. I mean, I can still not believe myself when I think back. We worked all the time. And we were like zombies sometimes, just walking around because there was literally no movies, dinners just with clients, or when we had like a team building thing. But it became such an experience, right? And I think this is also what actually makes architecture great. I can go here in New York, right? I mean, there's so many things to do, but it's all about consumption, which I feel it's less interesting than actually creation. And in architecture, the creation is an experience, right? And I always jokingly, maybe I said it also during your time here, where I say that people on Wall Street, they have to make a lot of money so that they can afford the kind of Maserati to drive around, to have the joy that we get ourselves just through the work that we do, especially right when our buildings open up and you see people going in and experiencing it. All of these kind of things are priceless, and people pay a lot of money for experiences, and we do that as part of our profession. So I think this is why I survived for 3 years. But I also very intentionally decided that this is not how I want to have my own company operate. So we have much more human hours at this point.
I think that's a great description, though. I think you're right. The kind of consumption activities that a lot of people partake in cities, buying cars, buying clothes, buying whatever. There's a buzz you kind of get from that. There's a little bit of energy and a feeling, and it's much more potent if you're the one that's actually just producing the work. It's a different high.
It's almost like, you're finding, like you're discovering something, and totally. It's very satisfying. You want to see like where it's going to take you and you don't really know. I was wondering back when you were in school in Munich, what was the architecture scene like at that time?
Yeah, so the architect scene at the school where I was were basically really like the second tier of architects who are very disillusioned by their work because like in Germany, there's so many rules. And I always had the feeling that they were like, okay, what can we still do by maybe breaking one rule? And I still remember there was this one presentation where the architect was very proud. He showed the building and he showed this kind of wavy roof, right? And they said like, oh yeah, so we were able to do this, but because this is how we presented to this city. And the city, they presented a drawing with a square box and like little shadows behind it. And that's how they got the approval, and then they built it. So it was like legally fine, but it was like really like a trick they played. That was one. And then there was this other architect, actually, now I remember. I don't know her name anymore. She was very, very progressive, very 70s, like split levels housing and prefabrication and so on. But I remember that somehow in a early collaboration, somebody kind of stole her credits on it, or there was like a little conflict. So that was the only project that was really realized, and she was super proud of it, and it well deserved, but was never able to do more afterwards, right? So it was like this weird atmosphere in that school. And then we had some guest lectures coming in, and of course we went to the other universities to see things. And I think, oh yeah, maybe that's interesting. There was this competition where the Münchner, the 5 courtyards, it's called now, it was built in the end by Herzog Dömerow. And that was an international competition, and we all went there. And I know that before, when people talked about Wim Koolhaas and so on, I was like, I don't really think I like it. And then I went there and saw the entry for this competition, and Omei lost, and I just loved it. I thought it was like the best thing ever, and that's actually was for me the moment where I was pursuing then later on the reasons to find a way how to work for him.
Very cool.
I want to ask a general question about your dedication and your work ethic. And I love the fact that you said that would you say you have to like never give up in architecture? I think that's totally true. I think especially true if you're practicing and you're doing your own projects, because they can be brutal. But what's always kind of what I remember was that you guys were like ultra dedicated and like never ever give up. And I've said this before in the podcast, like people talk about having stamina and endurance and dedication, but I often find that when it gets to a certain point, they crack. I've never seen that happen with you. At the same, like you seem to have no limit, but at the same time, throughout all of it, you're extremely positive, upbeat. You're cool. You're creative, and like so. And a lot of people, when they do consecutive long hours, they become kind of like darkened, So, like, how is it? Yeah, like, what is the secret? How is it that you're able to be so dedicated, but also tap into that optimistic mindset that you need to have to design and create things? It's a coffee.
No, this is great. There are 2 things come to mind because I had 2 interesting experiences. The first one, actually way back when in school. So my parents, after the 4th grade, they put me into a language-oriented kind of, we call it gymnasium, so it's a grammar school. And I'm not good with languages. I'm like the worst. And I suffered through the first 2 years. I wasn't good in sports because I had asthma. I couldn't do a lot of things. And I was tall and kind of skinny. People made fun of me. And I had like the worst experience. My grades were bad. I mean, it could have not gone worse, I feel. And I still remember I went home and I was trying to do my exercises and my schoolwork, and then I was just super depressed, and I just left the house. And my mother suddenly was like, "Hey, Matthias, what's going on?" I was like, "No, I just wanna be on my own." It was like, "No, this doesn't feel right. What's going on?" And so she left the house with me, and she walked, and I even cried. I was like, "I hate my school. This is the worst," and so on. And from one day to the other one, she took me out into another school. And from one day to the other one, my grades went well. People liked me, and I had a great time. And I was like, oh my God, it was not about me. It was about circumstances. And that just like the change from one school to the other one can be such a radical change in my life, how I feel, how I perform, that always resonated with me, that I can never take things that are difficult as granted. You can always change it by changing things in your life or in your attitude and so on. So this was incredible, empowering, and it actually resonates through my life all the time. I never let things, right when I see this is not going well, you shift, you find another way, because it's not me, it's actually the circumstances, and you can change them. The second one, it's actually a story from Peter Eisenman. We worked on the competition for the church for the year 2000, which was commissioned by the Vatican. He was invited, Richard Meyer was invited, Frank Gehry, and so on. So it was really, really high profile. And so we created different teams, and we all worked on this like mad people. And Peter at some point had to go away for like a month or so. So we kept on working day and night, and so on. And we created all of these kind of crazy concepts. And there were like 3 different schemes on the table. We were totally exhausted, and Peter comes back, and then it was like the big review. And I was so excited. I worked with one of my colleagues on this concept for him. And so we had everything on this big table. And then Peter came in, and then he looked at our model, was like, ugly. Next. And I was like, oh my God, 6 weeks of my life. Just like ugly. Did not even ask a question what it was about, how it felt, and so on. And I was like, oh my God, I can never take these things too serious. I have to have a very different attitude, how I work on this, how I present things, and so on. And I think this is kind of like in the office, right? We win and we lose competitions. When we lose them, I never take it personal. I never see it as part of the work that's not being liked. It's not good. It's like maybe the wrong jury, the wrong context. Of course, we also make wrong decisions here and there. But I think this takes, for me, the weight away that I have to criticize myself and be unproductively, right? I mean, you always do it like a little bit with productivity, trying to improve. And then also realizing, right, so sometimes the markets and where you operate and so on, you just have to find the right circumstances that the things that you do resonate well. And so I think this is, this is kind of the mantra. And then another thing, maybe the good thing about me is also I have a really, really short-term memory. And I reboot literally after like 4 hours.
Okay.
Next.
How is your office feeling about that? That's so funny.
Yeah, no, it's a gift. Somebody asked me, what is my superpower? And then I said the lack of memory.
That's fantastic. Those are really great points. I really love it. And I think that's another thing too that maybe young professionals don't often realize is that there's a lot of different factors at play with whether or not an office gets a commission, whether or not the building gets, underway, whether or not it gets completed. There's a lot of things that can happen that are not necessarily within your control. And also, I think after you have a bit of experience, you tend to put less negative pressure on every project because you understand there's going to be more. And there's hopefully a number that you're considering at that time.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that for me became very important in architecture school, right? It's like design, and you design things based on what your professor tells you. I think at OMA we could just play and do anything we wanted, but also, I mean, OMA was living off just incredible humans kind of working there endlessly, and you had like 20, 30, 100 ideas, and then you could pick the one. REM could pick the one strategically. That's the one, right?
Right.
But for me, what I learned is that architecture is strategy, right? And it's not just design. Your design is part of a strategy that you create. And that means that you can actually be, and that's why I come back to my math and physics kind of talent. It's suddenly not just about being creative. It's also kind of exploring what is good for the place, what is good for the client, how far can you push it, what can you do, and then you can build the arguments around it. You don't over-invest just into design exercises that a lot of people do because they're like, oh, I have to challenge modernism, postmodernism, and so on. It's like, yeah, all of this. But what you really want to do is something that moves cities and people forward, And then it becomes, for me, kind of more predictable how you think and how you work to a certain degree. And then you have to let loose again, of course, to create the magic. But there is first a strategy behind it. And that's actually, it still took time in this office here to get there. I was not ready yet 10 years ago with that kind of thinking, but today I am.
That's interesting. Yeah, because if you're running an office and you have a bunch of employees, you need to have some kind of structure so that you're not burning through all your cash or taking advantage of people, but also you have some amount of like predictability of how long things are going to take, or even just for getting time, like the chances of success. You need to have that sort of figured out. Just as you said, while leaving, there's a hefty amount of room for just wildness. You don't know what's going to happen. I would imagine it's a very difficult balance to achieve.
Yeah, and they also need to know what will people trust you with, right? Because like one of the big office buildings, $200 million, right? That's you're partially responsible for it. And are they going to trust you when you're rocky out of school? No. But if you have done 10 years of apartment renovations in a couple of houses, are they going to trust you? No. Right. So you do have to kind of, and I think we didn't do that early on. We were kind of just like pure force again in our case. So that could also work. So I don't want to dismiss it. But I think some things could have gone easier for us if we would have been a little bit more strategic. What kind of scales? What do we need to be able to climb up that kind of ladder of trust, right? Because in the end, people have to say, yeah, your drawings need to be good, and the building needs to stand up, but it also needs to sell and needs to do all of these kind of things. And are you the right person to do so? And sometimes things are against you, right? It could be the experience, or it could be also the marketing power, like a name, right? Sometimes it's like, why did that person get hired? It's like, it didn't matter anymore. It's a good name.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, when you want to break down like Bjarke's career, which is the most exceptional and extraordinary one, he is so strategic about trust building, about step by step how he created his brand. He was lucky that he was in Copenhagen at a time where Denmark woke up to great architecture. And they were like second in line, right? First was the Netherlands. And then it was kind of brewing that Denmark understood the value of architecture. And Bjarke was exactly there at the right time with his incredible talent, right? So he could do some really wacky buildings early on through competitions that, again, in America, you wouldn't have that opportunity. In Europe, it's not as easy as you think, but he was there at the moment where he could prove himself. And then, right, and he always built on this step by step. There was nothing left to chance. And that's also something that I feel like people should really look at and understand from him when they aspire to become another big Bjarke Ingels group by the methodology, how he created the kind of immersive experience that the biggest today.
Right. It's not just about, because I think a lot of people start their own practice because they want to have more control over the designs, which is great. But then there's the whole designing of the business and thinking about the business as you're talking about, getting different projects and where you want to be. So we should get to founding Honken. A specific question from that last bit of conversation, though. So was doing larger scale, like cultural institutions, towers, and, bigger projects always like the trajectory or the end goal in your mind?
No, actually, on my side, so I... Like in Munich, when I walked around, when I studied, I looked at this building, 6 stories and like 25 meters long. I was like, oh my God, would be so great to design something like this.
It's a big building.
Absolutely. In Munich scale, it's still quite big. But then, so that's where the beginning was. And then, of course, with Ron Koolhaas, the projects were super, super ambitious and very cultural oriented. It was never just like, okay, here's a developer office building, go. I think they're doing it now, but it I mean, I've never talked to a developer during my whole time with RAM. And then that was kind of the aspiration at that time, right? To do really, I mean, he was critical with modernism, enriching it and kind of pushing the story forward. So this were like a lot of things that were interesting at that time. But then, I think now I had like my moment with the tower, right? Jonas Square, 70 stories. But in the end, is that really that interesting? A tower is actually really easy going upwards, but where it gets really hard is actually when it touches the ground. And that's equally hard for every other building. So I'm now, I like to do another few tall buildings, but I think for me, it's actually much more now what's happening on the ground floor and what the building does typologically and emotionally and so on. The other topics that I find more interesting.
Yeah, I do feel like sometimes with towers, they're difficult because, you have a core, you have floor plates, and they repeat, and you have to dress it up and make it into kind of a nice form. And that's challenging for sure. I'm not trying to belittle that, but it's not the same thing as I think, because I feel like also one of the things you've always been interested in is how architecture affects people, like directly, and that kind of conversation. And for sure, the ground level, the first 5 stores or whatever, right, that's where the meat of that conversation takes place.
Yeah, exactly. And kudos to everyone, right? These towers, like structure and engineering, MEP systems, and so on. Amazing, but very often by the interior organization architecturally, it's very repetitive. So you can shrink a tower down to basically 6 floors, and it's the same kind of intellectual effort to solve the 6 floors versus like you have another 30 floors above it or 100 floors. So going backwards, at what point was Hawken founded or Hollwich Kushner? How did you guys meet? So it all happened actually, I was, when did that exactly happen? I think I was still at ETH teaching in Zurich, and I became really friendly with Jürgen Meyer, the great architect out of Berlin. Who became a good friend, and I went to Berlin and I saw him in his office, and he introduced me to a couple of people, including a drunk young architect named Mark Kushner, who had his last day celebrating already with champagne, leaving Berlin. And we were like, oh, he's like super fun. And we were chit-chatting a little bit, and he's like from New York. And that was like a first moment where we kind of touch base, or when we met. Then I was sometimes invited to be at reviews in New York, and he was also starting to teach. So sometimes he invited me, and vice versa. And then I actually got the teaching position at the University of Pennsylvania. And that was also one of these other stories where I got a call. I had to be there in 3 weeks. I gave up my whole life in Amsterdam at that time, but I also had a bumpy relationship, so that kind of worked out well.
Good timing.
For once, exactly. But yeah, so we basically just invited us back and forth, and then I had always done like competitions because I have a European license. I could do the European competitions with all kind of different potential architectural partners, but they never really worked out that well. And then there was another competition. Mark and we met, and we're like, oh, let's do this. And there was a high-rise competition, and it's just a vision. It was not a real thing, and it was based on, I think, just the future of high-rise. And we said the issue is global warming, rising sea levels, and we created something we called Sky Grove. And what was so exciting is that there was like a total match between what I was good at and what he was good at. I was really good at in coming up with concepts, ideas, forms, and so on, and he could frame it and intellectualize it and communicate it really well. And after this one competition, we were like, so what do you do? He was like, I don't know. I just quit my job at Hillinger or whatever it was in Philadelphia. I have another offer, but I don't know if I want to do it. I was like, well, now I'm here. I have no home anymore in Amsterdam. I want to stay here, but I still just had a H-1B visa with the university. Yeah, we basically said, like, why don't we start a firm? And then we were like, okay, let's do it. So how we do projects. And it was like, yeah, maybe we start with renovations of apartments. He knows some people where we can do that. We called it basically a professional shotgun wedding. Because we didn't know each other very well. We didn't do a business plan. We didn't really figure out what to do. We just said, like, okay, let's go. We rented 2 desks at a depressed developer in Chinatown in a building that sometimes flooded and was like smelly. It was like crazy when we were there. And then fun fact was, so I really liked how we worked together. Then at some point I talked to Jürgen Meyer, and I was like, I started to work with Mark. We're starting a company, and we're like, oh, Matthias, that is like super strategic. I was like, why is it strategic? I mean, Mark is a great guy. We get along. I think he's really talented. And they were like, yeah, no, but his family are developers. And we're like, what? So I did not do my due diligence. I did not do my research. But what that actually did was that my relationship to Mark was authentic as him as an architect and as a friend. And it was not about, oh, this could be really good for a career and so on. And I think he felt it because when you're rich and when you have a developer family, right, a lot of people want to be your friend. Yeah. And I was his friend because of him and his talent, and I did not know anything about the backgrounds. And then it started that we did little renovations here. One of them, thankfully, well, being rich in New York helps that his family wanted to have a renovation of an apartment that we did somewhere close to Central Park. There were a couple of other people through his family connections that he introduced. And then me again, I was like forced, right? I have no connections, I have no money, I'm new in New York. So what do? I just go around and I try to find projects and promote the firm and come up with ideas. And like one of the things was that I was teaching a studio at Penn that I called Iconic Design, ecological icons. And and at that time also I tried to find any kind of project. So we worked in favelas in Rio de Janeiro to bring in culture into the favelas, and we designed them as iconic projects, right? So ecological icons. And there was a website that was called the Club of Pioneers. And I went on, somebody said I should really communicate my ideas to them. So I talk about iconic design, send an email to the chief editor. Turns out that the chief editor was a German, Alex Diehl is his name. And the Club of Pioneers was actually a website from BMW just to promote progress and stuff. So it was a total just marketing gig. But this guy was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. I'm going to be in New York. Let's meet. So I met this guy. He was really excited what we were doing and about this vision. And he was like, oh, I may have like something we can pitch to Mini Cooper about like an event space on a roof. I was like, amazing. Yes, go, go, go. So we made a little model about how an event space could look like as a pitch. And he presented it to Mini and they were like, we love it. Find us a roof. And then he was like, so how do you find a roof in New York? I was like, don't worry, I find one. And what did I know about laws? How difficult it is to do anything on a roof in New York? Yeah. Number one, it needs to be on a commercial space. There can nothing be below that is residential. You have a lot of zoning requirements. You have also weight issues because roofs are normally not prepared to take big loads and so on. So I basically biked around all of New York looking at roofs, finding the addresses. I went up 110 roofs in like 1 month. And then I finally found like 3 different roofs that were kind of, that the owners were interested in and so on. So the BMW people with Mini came here I presented them the roofs, and there was another layer of reality coming in. The first one was somewhere in Chelsea on 21st Street, and we were all there, great roof, great view. And the owner was like, yeah, Matthias, you have to talk to the security guy. And I talked to him, I was like, yeah. So what we want to do here is like an event space for like 3 weeks for Mini Cooper, and we can have like hundreds of people coming up here. And then the security guy was like, you take people through the building? I was like, yeah, totally, and so on, easy here, elevator. I was like, no, we have to protect the perimeter. I was like, okay, what does it mean? And then it was like, what do you need to protect? I was like, oh, you know where we are? I was like, no, what is this building? It's a warehouse. It's like, oh, it's the largest art vault of Manhattan. We're standing on $10 billion worth of art. So I was like, BMW people, next roof. So we went to the next one. So we went from roof to roof to roof, and then we had one actually where then it also happened. So we could design it, and that was our first real exciting project, right? Because who cares about renovation of a luxury apartment? So me connecting through the Club of Pioneers, finding Alex Deal, doing the pitch, finding a roof, going onto roof, designing it. There were like 100 other issues that came our way, which were nerve-wracking. And then the roof opened at the day when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And nobody cared. 2008. But that was really our big entry into not getting stuck, which could happen so easily into the world of renovations and apartments. That was immediately like pop-up, brand, fun, right? And we created this hill and projections and so on. So that really set the tone actually very much into the future. And then when you think about, right, so Mark brought in the high-end residential stuff that gave us money. I brought in the kind of cool kind of branding stuff. So it was even by finding projects, it was based on our kind of who we are, but it really helped them to push the firm further.
That's very interesting. I've always kind of wondered for young offices who aspire to do let's say more interesting work, like you're kind of describing, like how do you get into that scene? Because it's difficult, and there are now a lot of really big name, big brand offices who do it. Like, is it, I mean, the Mini Cooper thing, that's crazy. I mean, that's a very specific, I don't know how likely it is that someone can repeat that process. But is it through competitions? Is it through, do you slowly do small installations and you build up to larger structures? Like, how do you get to that? Those kind of commissions, and I guess also going back to what you said, like establishing trust.
Yeah, actually, you know, if I would think that I'm now like 15 years or so back, question is, what would I do with now all the things that I know? And I would probably just be tired, exhausted, and give up. Let me be a banker in New York. I want to have my Maserati. No, but this is like such a difficult question, right? And actually tying that into the next experience, right, in 2008, when the world ended for architecture, right? Every project, everything just disappeared. We started Architizer. And that was at that time, right, still inspired by the internet, seeing that Facebook was growing and what was happening there, and then still seeing that the New York Times was incredibly critical with Mouchamp. Basically, if he didn't like you, you had no chance to become a successful architect in New York. And we wanted to just break these rules and these layers. And that's why we started Architizer, to promote young talents, right, to try to make people famous, so that when they're known, that they get a higher chance to really get other projects, right? Because there was this hidden layer of talents that didn't have the chance to get out, right? And that was really then the mission of Architizer, and then Architizer A+ Award, which was really an idea for Mark at the time, even supercharging that kind of vision. Because I still think it's still so difficult, right? In Europe, yes, you would do competitions, but it's always like when you apply, right? It's not like well, they're the free competitions for everyone. Then you have 250 people, and it's totally meaningless because your chances are too low. If it is a restricted competition, then you maybe have to show that you have done little things already. Very often they have a quota for unknown firms, which is great. So you get at least a chance, but you need to be European, an European architect, or sometimes it's also from the world, but whatever, some world trade treaties that allow you to get in. In America, there are no competitions, right? So there are these little ones that are, I don't know, I never saw, we did them early on, but then we realized it never led into anything that really helped us. So I feel, find small developers, try to find, of course, family networks. This is normally how in the architecture world, it's still happening through that, which totally disadvantages anyone who's not super connected through as a family or in a wealthy status. Maybe, I mean, right now, that might be actually interesting. The reinvention of retail, right? It's huge and nobody has answers. And I would maybe try to push into that world, right? Because right now, because nobody has answers anymore, there's more creative freedom, and just trying to find entrepreneurs that are testing out things. But it's always, it's going to be hard to charge money for it, right? There's going to be a lot of sweat. It's very uncertain. But that would be one way. The other one is actually, I collected every email that I ever got from a person into one folder. So I have everyone that I met for the last 20 years. But that's, you have to build your network, right? If you don't have it. So whoever you meet, get the email, put it into either way, a safe space, put it in an Excel file, and then maybe start to come up with ideas and promote them and communicate them out so that people see what you do, and that you have slowly but surely recognition. And it could be first just out of the network of people that you know. Later on, hopefully you get some press, right? And it gets to the next level. But I could not really say one way or another, right? I still feel that also even in today's context and with the knowledge I have, I could not give you a very clear strategy.
It's difficult. I mean, I think the brute force method is, you have to have that spirit at the very least. One of the stories that Marina and I kind of always tell to like students, because they always ask like, how did you start and whatever. So we had moved, you probably know this, but we had moved to New York, and at that time it was still like the aftermath of 2008 was very much in effect. And I remember applying to almost 400 offices. I applied to every single possible office I could get a hold of, because I had no money and I moved without a place lined up and no job lined up. And I'm like, I don't care about my ego. I want to work in an architecture office, and I need to make a certain amount of money to survive.
And actually, I would say a big thank you to Architizer, because when I was in France trying to find firms in New York and apply and find jobs, that was the website I would go on to find these people. And I mean, without it, I don't know how I would have got a job there,
So when you guys were deciding to start Architizer, I know you kind of talked about the reasons for it and seeing the effects of Facebook and kind of that being part of the thinking or the equation. And Architizer has kind of grown and blossomed to what it is now. So did Architizer start basically near the same time as HWKN? And the two have always been kind of parallel to each other or together?
Yeah, so HWKN had like a 1 year, 2 year earlier start. And then 2008 happens, right? And we're like, what now? And nobody cared about architecture. Everything was kind of on hold. And then I pitched to Mark. I was like, look, because I had my ETech, my electronic architecture studio before, I was like, there's a chance. And just being like entrepreneurial and trying to do things different. So I pitched this idea to him, and he was like, this is stupid. I was like, no, look, and so on. And then we called it actually, oh my God, there were so many crazy bad names. Maybe I can remember them again. Well, hopefully I remember them again. But I still remember we dismissed many of them. Yeah. But anyway, so we we started to put like presentation decks together, how we can present things differently and so on. And then actually, which I find, maybe this is the biggest learning for me, stay in your networks and always be engaged with people, because Alex Steele, who was the one from the Club of Pioneers, we then pitched it to him and he was like, that is awesome. And he got involved as a third partner. And he had the tech behind him, he had the programmers behind him. So we knew that we had to raise some money, but it wasn't crazy. I think like $50,000 or $100,000 that we had to raise, that then actually Mark could do, right? So again, of course, if we would have not networks and not one person who's has more financial access to financing, that would have not worked. So it's unfortunately always that reality that the powers are important. But so there was like the idea, the tech person, and Mark with his family connections, he could raise kind of a very early friends and family round. Then we programmed the whole thing. And then we were like, okay, now we're ready. How do we get the word out? And then I tapped into my old networks and I knocked on the door with Rem Koolhaas. And it was like, Rem, we're doing this amazing thing. Can we get some of your projects onto Architizer? And his PR department did that. So we immediately had like the first projects were basically Rem Koolhaas. Right? And that immediately was just like a fire, right? Where people were like, oh my God, he's showing this, we're showing our work. And then we had a launch party at the Storefront for Art and Architecture, which was also like everyone from New York came, right? Free drinks and crazy presentation. But that really helped that Architizer get off the ground very quickly. And then suddenly, I mean, we couldn't run fast enough, right? Because it was really exponential how it kind of developed right away. The only challenge that we had is we did not have figured out a business model. Like here we are again, and we're like, oh, okay, so now we spend $100,000 and no money comes in. That took a long while to figure out how it makes some money on Architizer that it can just survive on its own.
It's fascinating because those kinds of businesses and those things you create on the internet, like they're very different from architecture practice. Like there may be some similarities at a really, really fundamental level, but not really. Like they're very different things. And I was always curious if, I mean, it sounds like not, but if you guys had started Architizer thinking that it would be kind of like a side business that would bring in money to support the architecture side, to support Hawken to do architecture? Because I think a lot of architects kind of think maybe I can do some side hustle that is a legitimate business to offset, the cost of doing architecture. Yeah,
no, there was definitely like the idea, right? I mean, you dream about money that could come from the internet for free, but it's harder than you think. But then we were also like, oh, it helps basically to promote architects. But then the problem was, since we were behind it, we did not allow ourselves to promote us. Right. So I never won an Architizer A+ award, even though I have an award here, but I didn't win it. But then there was one moment where a client contacted us and was like, I tried to find an architecture firm who can help us, and we're like, oh, we know one. So we did actually El Laboratorio de Gelato, the ice cream factory. That came through an inquiry, somebody to find an architect through Architizer, and we ruthlessly took it and did it ourselves. So that helped us. But when I reflect backwards, the problem is that the business couldn't be more different, right? Architizer is a media company. It's nothing to do with architecture. It shows architecture pictures, but the business model doesn't do anything with it. And I think it did take a lot of resources and brain and so on to do that. I think because architecture was slow after 2008, it didn't really hurt us. But I normally would not do that again. I think I would stay more in the lane of this is an architecture firm and how we can maybe branch out, right? Can we do other services? Can we do proactive into real estate development? Can we find sites that we maybe do pre-planning and pitch it to people? I think it would be better to stay in the ecocenter of architecture and not go into like a media company, because that's too far away from really a business model that you would understand.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting though, because you're highlighting that Architizer happened sort of as a result, and at least during the time of the economic crash of 2008, which gave you, I guess, the silver lining, the time to do that. I agree. Otherwise, it's hard enough doing architecture and trying to layer on. So for Architizer, did you guys end up? I mean, it's still running. Is it in the same like physical office location as HWKN, or is it a different thing altogether?
Yeah, so there's lots of stories around Architizer and HWKN. So basically what happened is that, so Mark and I, in our collaboration in architecture, we did have actually early on a lot of issues. And the issues were that, well, from my perspective, is that I was always the design driver, the energy, concepts, forms, and so on. But Mark also, as an architect, obviously had also the architecture ego that he said, like, I want to design, and I also want to do the things that comes very natural for me for years now, not at the beginning of my career. So we had very often like different opinions, different conflicts. We were not aligned about a real clear vision. So at some point we did the pact where, because we were fighting, and we're like, no, we either have to split or we have to stop fighting. And we said, okay, let's stop fighting. And then the deal was basically, I'm the engine and Mark is the voice. Right? And that worked out well, right? Mark is very charming, he's great in presenting, and that's what he did, right? Client presentation, this is what we did. Woohoo! Right? And it was, and it really worked really well. And then Architizer really kind of exploded, right? And we were able to get media contracts, so to be able to also afford things. We hired people, and that one became so attractive, at least from my reflection, for Mark, because Mark likes to be loved. And everyone loved Architizer. So this was for him really the platform that he felt incredibly comfortable. So he then more and more became just involved in Architizer, become less and less involved in HWKN. And that was actually a really great split because, yeah, I could do the work that I wanted to do. He did the presenting and became basically the face of Architizer. He also continued to raise money. Then at some point he actually tried to retool Architizer. So he seriously raised money, like $15 million for it, by the intention to turn it into a sourcing platform for architects, which was a really, really interesting proposition. And I was running basically the architecture firm. Now, the good thing what happened there, I had a couple of advisors, and I talked with them about the different roles and so on, how this was working. And I said, my challenge now is that Mark is always the face, also from HWKN, right? So he was out there presenting, meeting also with journalists and so on, but he didn't create anything. Like when you think about Wendy, right? Everyone knows Wendy. Nothing came from Mark, right? That was me with Robert May. At the end, the selling and the framing came from Mark, which was also genius, right? The name Wendy, that we decided on it. It came actually from an intern who pitched it to us, but to decide these kind of things. So then my advisors were saying, I told them, my problem is that, right, we have client contacts, but Mark is the face of it. And then later on, I have to do the work. They don't take me as serious as they should, right? Because they're always like, oh, great to see you, Matthias, where's Mark? So then, thankfully, I worked very hard to actually change my comfort of being out there to present, to be the face of the firm, so that people were more emotionally connected to me, which then allowed me to be better in selling the work and transforming the work. And then Mark really focused on Architizer. So he basically became a silent partner in HWKN for years. Mm-hmm. And Architizer then grew to like 40 people. He rented space downstairs in the same building, but they moved away. So there were two firms running independent from each other. We saw each other like twice per week. When I came down to Architizer, he came up. Sometimes we checked in on business and on some of the trajectories we were taking. But that was a relationship that actually worked really well. Now, going a little bit further, like some of the troubles that then came was that the business model for this kind of sourcing platform is incredibly difficult. And I still must say, kudos, he tried, but it was too big of a challenge, because when you source things in architecture, but you can help the architects to write the spec books, it goes into the drawings. At some point, somebody gets a hand on it, a contractor, then he value engineers. So he changes actually who is committed to the specs. And then if you want to try to monetize it, it's very difficult to actually monetize anything not out of a subscription, maybe out of the cost of the products. Mm-hmm. And subscriptions are really difficult for architects to do, because we're already strained, right, on our resources and so on. So he basically was not able to get the next round of funding and ran out of money. And then he had to basically just let go everyone except 4 people on Architizer, and then Architizer became a media company again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a crazy story. That's a crazy story. I mean, it sounds to me like a huge undertaking for sure to help architects specify things. I mean, I think the challenge I like the idea of it, but I think the challenge is architecture is just so incredibly complicated. It takes a long time to produce buildings. And then, as you said, architecture offices a lot of them are not very great at managing their business. And even the ones that are don't necessarily make a whole lot of extra cash. So I can see where it would be difficult for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was good to try, but it's as with many ventures, they come and go. But at least it's back to a media company. And then, Architizer moved up again, back into the HWKN office. Yeah. And then when the pandemic hit, they moved out. So they're somewhere.
Somewhere across the world. So exactly. With HWKN, so the office has been around for 15 years or something like this, right?
I think so, yeah. Somewhere there.
That's wild. Mm-hmm. So looking back, were there key points throughout its life where, like, key projects for you guys or landmark projects that either were significant to you just internally, or significant in that it allowed you to get to the next level and get other projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we did the Mini Cooper rooftop, we did also then, because then we established ourselves as kind of pop-up and cool kids on the block, and / also connections that I had a little bit into. I'm like somebody who went to all of these kind of entrepreneur meetings and thought leaders and so on. So I met a couple of interesting people. So we got the opportunity to do the unique look cubes. So suddenly we were like in this kind of branding world, and that opened up the opportunity that we got invited to compete for the Young Architects program with MoMA PS1. And that one was one of the most important moments for the firm, because when we won and when it got built, we were in the press, we were in the media, and the attention to us was like, oh, these guys, they're there. And that's like the MoMA stamp of approval is priceless. It's priceless. If you can do that right now, they're not doing it, the Young Architects program. I hope they find a new format that really helps the talents, the young talents, to get the word out.
Oh, wait, they're not doing it? Wait, what happened?
Well, right now they have a pause, and they're rethinking a little bit. New things are coming, so they're very active on it. But now they also through Corona and so on, they just took a break. Sure. But that was really crucial on really pushing us into people's attention. And it's kind of amazing. Actually, yesterday we did a website analysis where people click. It's still windy. People still clicking it. It's still there. And then parallel, which is also, of course, we were very lucky through Mark's family. They didn't hire us until Mark put his foot down for one project where he said, like, let us design at least the facade. We got the facade through a lot of arguments and pain. But then what happened is that the city was so enthusiastic about it. They were like, that's exactly what we want. They gave green light. Everything went fast. And suddenly his family woke up. It's like, oh, there's maybe a value in actually Mark and his business partner to work on these things. And then there was a competition that was organized for the Journal Square Towers. And that was a true competition. So that was not just, we got the project. I had to find a local architect. So I shopped around and I talked to KPF and SLCE and ended up with Gary Handel, which was absolutely a blessing. Because he's, first of all, the nicest guy. He knows what he's doing. And we had like 100 different forms how we could do these towers. Now with my knowledge, I could design these towers literally in one weekend. But it took us 3 months or 2. And, and then we presented them, and the jury were actually the financial partners, was not Mark's family. There were money out of Washington, D.C., and they saw these towers and they liked it, and we got the green light. And that was, of course, then our big breakthrough. We had MoMA PS1, this really high intellectual, cool, curious architecture and big building. And this combination then was a really, really interesting mix for us that helped us to really get the attention. And now then we could say we did the big building, or it's under construction, but it takes like 6 years until it's done. But there was enough that was behind it. And then, so that were crucial things, right? Wendy and then Journal Square. Before that was basically the little installation for Mini Cooper. And then another thing, which is actually now probably 6 years ago, exactly at this time, somebody recommended me to go to MIPIM, which is a big developer conference, investor conference in Cannes. I'm going there next week again. And so I'm like, okay, let's try it out. I fly down there, walk around in my nice architectural outfit with a portfolio. And it's like, hey, can we talk about architecture? No time. People run by. And so on. It's like, what the hell am I doing here? This is the wrong place. I go to the Munich stand and sit down, get a beer. And there's one guy from Munich, from the city of Munich. I was like, oh, I'm from Munich, but I live in New York. And we chit-chat and was like, by the way, are here any developers? You were like, oh, this guy. So grabbed this one dude, Andreas Eule, and he's like in semi-traditional outfit from Bavaria, which I was like, it's weird. And he sits down, and I tell him about some of the plans we're doing and the projects, and we did with MoMA and so on. And then he was like, yeah, so maybe I can invite you for like a project. I think I have something in mind. So came back to New York, and then a couple of weeks later, he was like, get an invitation for a big competition in Munich. And we participated and we win. And that's the Macherei, which is just now opening right now, which is a hotel and 2 office buildings. And that introduced us to the German market. Wow. As the first project. And then, of course, I mean, every time I went to Germany, I was like, okay, now I'm going to meet 10 new developers, always taking advantage of a new location and nurturing these kind of contacts. And it took years and years and years until more follow-up things are happening. But right now we have 8 buildings in the making in Germany. We just got invited at once to 4 competitions. We have no idea how we managed them, but we are already full speed running with 2 of them. But that was also like such a crucial moment where there was an introduction into the German market, basically through this one competition that we won. But we got invited because we did all of these other things, and also because we're in New York. Which brings me to a very important point. You also have to think about what is your work, but also who are you and why would people like to work with you? And people always tell us they love to work with us because we're high energy and always positive and never like, right? So as many architects, right, always like, oh, cool, great idea. We can make it better. We can make do and so on. And then the other thing is in Germany, we're so successful because we do hopefully good work, but also because we're from New York. So I would never open an office in Germany because then I would lose the flair of a New York firm. And I may open one in London or so, but it's really interesting to actually think about why would people hire you, not architecture, you as a person, your attitude, your context, where you are. All of these things are really interesting and important. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And your graduation project in school, they give you a 3, and now they should like be like, remember Matthias? Look, that's his building right there.
Yeah, I have to invite my old professors for the opening of Macherei, actually. That's a good idea.
You should, you should.
That's fascinating. The looking at oneself and trying to figure out why a client would hire you. I mean, like in some ways, that's like the first question you should ask yourself if you have a business. But I think for architecture, for creatives, why, like you said, why would they hire you as just you as a person and not necessarily because of your work? And I've always had the belief or kind of suspicion or the assumption that the New York brand, let's say, has weight, and I think it does. And so it's fascinating to hear that that's the case specifically with Germany.
Yeah, no, New York is fantastic, and even like having an office in Manhattan and not in Brooklyn, like there were like a lot of decisions there. And then maybe another interesting story for you is for you guys is by knowing all of these kind of things, we made one lethal mistake in our career, and it became very clear later on. So when Architizer was running really kind of well, and I was also writing a book on aging and all the kind of things, we realized that HWKN, right, is kind of a nice acronym, but whatever it means. And right, it's like Hollwich Kushner, but nobody really knew. And we pushed a little bit. The company was always called Hollwich Kushner, so the HWKN was just an acronym. And then we said, because I'm getting more known through the aging research, Mark, through Architizer, maybe we have to put our names more to the forefront, right? So, and then we're like, okay, we're rebranding, and we were like, okay, we're calling it Hollwich Kushner, and we changed the logos, had it all designed, we rolled it out, and then 1 month later, Trump announced that he's running for president with his special advisor, Mr. Kushner. And we were like, oh, God.
And you guys are a huge fan of Trump, right?
Exactly. And we were like, hopefully he doesn't win. And then, well, for many, many reasons, not just for our naming. And then Mark and I, we were just joking. It's like, so what are we going to do when Trump wins, right? And I was like, yeah, should we go back to HWKN, right, and put the Kushner away? And then Mark just joked, and he was like, no, just take the Kushner away, call it Hollwich. And then Trump wins, and I was like, Mark, let me take the Kushner away. I was like, oh, hell no. But I was also like, that was this moment where I felt like the Kushner family, like, I mean, his parents and so on, so close to them doing these projects. I was like, no, we cannot go back with this. We have to kind of counter the negativity of the Kushner name that's so associated to Trump by sticking to it and doing good work. Big mistake. Worst thing ever. Never, ever, ever be generous on that level because it turned out that nobody could hire us. We had literally 4 years of America where I drove crazy with business development. I was just traveling, meeting people loved the work and so on, but no project came out of it.
What?
And yeah, because, and then when Trump left and also Mark Kushner left, I re-engaged with a lot of developers, and they were like, well, Trump is gone, and Mark Kushner has left. What's your name? It's Hawken. It's like, oh, cool, now we can hire you.
It's so crazy.
Wow.
It was amazing. It's like, oh my God, for 4 years, I stood up for this name. And it really, when you look at our growth in terms of the firm, 4 years of like droop down, right? And they basically said the people who know the Kushners, right? So that it's one family, right? But they split ideologically when Charlie Kushner, who's the brother from Murray Kushner, who's the father from Mark Kushner, where there were like illegal things going on, and Charlie Kushner went to prison, family split. And so basically the Trump people, where a lot of developers in New York are kind of Republican friendly, they would basically not hire a Kushner because that was the wrong Kushner side,
right?
Because they were not friendly to Jared Kushner. And the Democrats, they were basically like, Kushner name, that is too confusing. And if Trump tweets one negative tweet about the development where the Kushner, Hollwich Kushner is involved, it could kill deals, right? And so nobody touched us. So yeah, we did a couple of projects here and there, but in terms of like where you would normally see our trajectory, where it should have been, was totally disrupted. And that was our biggest mistake, really, in our career. But I think the likeliness that this is happening to anyone else, that your business partner's name is like the most hated advisor of the most hated president, it's very unlikely. So you can relax about it, but find a good name, but do not use, and from other advisors, which I got later, do not use your own name for a firm. Because also when you think at some point selling or you retire and so on, those are really challenging moments for a firm. And if you keep it more neutral, it's a little bit more a brand, and the brand, it's very likely easier to survive and monetize. That's my recommendation. Not just because of a Kushner name, just forget names, find something really cool.
That's interesting. I mean, that's a hyper-specific situation and mistake that was like, not really totally your guys' fault, obviously. That's so wild, though, that, I mean, this is where the general topic of branding, I think, is interesting, because it's something that I do feel like amongst a lot of the hardcore architects kind of dismiss that idea of branding because it's kind of icky and sounds sleazy. And there's certain companies that have brands that are like that and they're phony. But that kind of stuff, the names and whatnot, it matters, because especially in a world where, everyone's typing in 150 characters on Twitter, like those things really, really make a difference. And when it comes to a developer, as much as I disagree with it, I can understand and sympathize. They're not going to risk hundreds of millions of dollars because of this name. And it's so funny that the next day almost it switched. It was like, oh, okay, you're Hawken and he's out of the office, so let's go, we're good.
No, absolutely. And that's, again, I think what a lot of architects forget is it's a business, it's a strategy, right? And we should look into all other businesses, why they thrive, how they make money, how they do growth strategies, right? And write a business plan, right? It's painful, but at some point figuring out how do you get a project and how do you have enough money to be able to actually afford it, right? And even if you say like, I'm teaching, I make money here, put it into your financial strategy, right? It doesn't mean like you maybe change everything how you do it, but at least you're more mindful about these things that you need to do. And as soon you're in a business, as soon you write a business plan, it's like competitors, right? And then you're like, who do you compete with? And early on, right, we were like, okay, we compete maybe with Sowil. Do we compete with LTL? No, they're more in an academic world. We're not, and so on, right? And then actually, I went through a whole exercise after Mark left, looking into where do we go and who do we compare us with? And that was actually really incredible. And we know exactly where we're going now. I never knew it before. It took us some time.
So you guys sound pretty busy right now with competitions and things happening in Germany and in the US. How big is the office currently?
Yeah, so we are 20 people.
Wow. And
we call ourselves lean and mean. And also, right, so it's basically a boutique innovation architecture firm. That's also something how we define ourselves. So we actually don't want to get too big. That's an intention. There's a maximum of 35 people that right now we have kind of in our minds and in our books. But we also decided, which is also important for everyone, that you really make sure where you want to be. We decided we do not do executive work or even in local projects. So we're purely design. That means we go to DD. We continue to be involved in other projects, in the project later, in the other phases. But with that strategy, we basically act as if we are like a 60 to 80 person firm, because we work with Gensler on a project in Austin. We work with Adamson Associates on a project in London. We work with CLMAP on a project in Munich. We work with all of these kind of different partners now on projects. That is, I love it. It's actually great, but it's a conscious decision to not offer all services and always find these partnerships. For us is essential, because then we can operate in all of these different markets with enough knowledge. But it is, on the other hand, of course, a little bit nerve-wracking, because we have to bring in more projects for the amount of people that we have, because these design phases are much shorter, of course. Versus when you do construction administration, you're still like, I get money for the next 2 years consistently, which is something that we don't have.
It sounds to me that this is probably a more lucrative business plan, because I feel like a lot of offices kind of, start, losing money when they get into like the nitty gritty details and the CA and all of the issues, right?
Maybe. Once
you start getting into construction. Is it a weird relationship to work with a local architect, but be the one that came up with, the design and make sure that the vision you came up with is carried through until the end?
You mean like egos?
Egos or just, there's the guys that are going to detail it, but you're the one who designed it and came with the idea, and how you preserve that throughout the phases,
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the partner. There, for example, Adamson Associate is a purely executive architect firm. So they're like, no ego, nobody should know us. We just do what you want and we help you to succeed. But then you have other ones which are also design architects, where then they become opinionated, right? Not just technical, but also on that. And that becomes a little bit more difficult. However, we found a way where our responsibility matrix is organized that the executive architect comes into the team at the day one, and we stay there until the last day, and we share workshops, and we respect their opinion, and we even let them also, of course, design, right? Because for me, in the end, wherever the design comes from, the best one should win. And it turned out that we actually have become entire friends with all of these other executive and local architects we're working with, like KSS on the Innovation Center for the University of Pennsylvania. We're always looking for new projects together again. OSA in Munich, we did the Macherei together. We're great friends. So I think it is very important that you're conscious about these two different roles, but that you curate a process that is exciting for everyone and also respectful to everyone. And I think you should never see yourself as like, oh, I'm doing design and now you do this. It's like, no, we do the design. Tell me, is this good? Is this bad? Can we do it better? What is your idea? And you emotionally connect them, because then they're going to be also invested until the last day to really stay true to your vision and not be at some point, it's like, yeah, they didn't know what to do. Let's do it better. Right? And then they can put their opinions in it, and then you lose.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think that's a more humane way to do things. Is also, I think, really smart, and you could even say strategic. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I like the idea, as you said, that you kind of, it allows you to almost operate as a larger office, especially if you're really close with these other people and you work well. Like from the end product perspective, you're effectively a larger office. It makes a lot of sense. And large buildings are so crazy complicated that to be a one-stop shop for it, I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, how do you get to that point now? I think maybe like 20 years ago was much easier, but I think now it would take, you'd have to practice for like 15, 20 years before you could do your own thing, because there's so much to know.
Yeah, and it's also, you become very quickly pigeonholed into a topology, right? Because then you become maybe the pop-up person, or you become the apartment building tower person. And what excites me the most is, I mean, right now, actually, I just counted, I think we have 28 projects right now ongoing. And it's from office building right in London to a residential building brand with prefabrication in Germany out of wood, to a prefabricated office buildings also in Germany, towards a hybrid mixed-use development as office and parking and residence next door in Austin. Then we're working on a cultural project in upstate New York, right? And you could never be so flexible between the topologies, sizes, and locations if you would do everything. And that's what I enjoy. I mean, that's maybe also why I'm still upbeat, because it's always changing. It's always something new, always something different. And it's just super exciting.
Yeah.
So what is your day-to-day look like these days? Like, do you still get to design, or you're just running this machine office and all of the stuff that goes with?
Yeah, so that's why I define this kind of boutique innovation firm, because I want to be involved in every project. But also, when Mark left, I promoted 4 of my most trusted people as partners, which is absolutely awesome, because they're incredible, talented, and it feels like the company is now standing on broader shoulders, and it's also less ego, right? So it's more communal. That means that they're running really the projects. I maybe run 1 or 2 when it's like competitions where they're not involved, but then we're discussing them also throughout the week and throughout the month. And I think my day looks like that I have to get up really, really early these days, because all of my German clients and Saudi Arabia and everyone want to talk to me before noon. So that's a problem with time zones.
Isn't that like a 6-hour difference?
Yeah, 6 hours, or Saudi Arabia is like 7. London is 5, so it's getting a little bit closer slowly. But it is, so I'm involved in a lot of these kind of check-ins with clients and so on. And then with the team, but let me see, what did I do today? I can show you. Here, I did some little sketch about this is how much you get from me. And then over there is somebody to work on this. But then we also do workshop sessions. And of course, for the last 2 years, everything just on Zoom and so on. But now we're finally doing it also in person again. But I still would think 30% meetings with clients and so on. 30% I do emails and business, which I would love to reduce a little bit more. Then there's 15% of BD going out there, and then there's 15% of design work.
Interesting.
That sounds like pretty full days.
It's very precise.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
A couple last questions. The first was that you had mentioned that maybe at some point earlier in your career, you were less confident in your kind of presenting skills. And I think that's interesting to hear, because I've always thought of you as being incredibly well-spoken, very captivating, and you've done like TED Talks and things like this. So I guess, I don't know if I have a question. I guess the question is, like, how did you develop those skills? Was it always naturally kind of part of within you, do you think? And then the second thing is, participating in TED Talks and other things like that are like, why do it? Because it's a lot of time. You have to put a lot of effort into making a presentation, to thinking about it. Why do that if there's not clearly a direct return?
So I basically officially shy.
Come on.
That's crazy.
I used to. But actually doing that one transition from that one school where everyone hated me to the other one where people liked me, I became actually class speaker and then school speaker. And so I actually became a little bit more comfortable to be out there and to do things. But then still with lectures and so on, I always wrote my lectures word by word, and then I was standing there and reading and trying to pretend to not read. Until one day, right, somebody was like, Matthias, you have to speak freely. And I still remember it was a picnic conference in Amsterdam, And I had it all written out, and but also lots of slides, everything prepared. And I walked to the podium, I took my notes, I threw them away, and I was like, okay, this is it. And oh my God, the first like 2 minutes were like bumpy, and I lost the word, and then it went in, and then I got the rhythm, and then I realized that people responded. I could see how they respond to me. I could change my trajectory of my speech, right? And then I never ever, and now I'm not even writing notes anymore. I go through the first kind of minute multiple times in my mind. And then, of course, I actually do give my presentations to myself, standing up and testing it and training it once or twice or three times. Yeah, it was really an intention to learn it and to train it, because it's actually amazing how different it becomes when it's free and when you can respond to people and when you can capture their imagination. And then why doing it is it really helps. So TED Talk, right? So mine was actually TED-U, which never got published, but I had an audience, and people came back and was like, I like your talk and so on. You stay in touch with them. TED was for Mark definitely very important, since that really was geared towards him and Architizer more than the architectural firm. But nowadays there's actually, you just have to, let's say it this way, you have to find the right places to talk. And there are a lot of architectural conferences where I have not been for a very long time, but I signed up for 4 developer conferences in Germany this year. And you just have to also find a topic that makes them curious and then makes them worth hiring you. And ever since I figured that out, people give me cards. And the last time I did it in Frankfurt, I got 4 leads out of that. And they're still percolating, right? Architecture takes time. But I know there's going to become at least 2 projects in the long run from one speech. So I would say do it wherever you can. But find your audience, find your topic. Don't just think about, you need to talk about what's good for you. Just talk about something where you feel that's going to create business for you. So you have to present something that people see a value in. And right now, obviously, I talk about the future of work, the future of live, how we retool our cities after Corona. And people just are very, very eager to then engage and to learn more.
That's great.
That's very interesting. My last question for you would be, what is next for HWKN?
Yeah, actually, that I can bind in a little bit the bigger topic, which was interesting, that 3 years ago, I reflected on my life and I was like, oh my God, I did everything I wanted to do.
Really?
I was like, I'm done. At that time, I was like 47 or so. I was like, okay, done. Now I can go. But because I wanted to live in New York, I wanted to teach, I wanted to write a book, I wanted to build a building, maybe a high-rise, right, a cultural project. So everything was there. But then I was like, okay, so what's next? Yeah, and basically, at that time, I was like, my ambitions need to become sharper and stronger, especially focusing towards adding value to people. And then I said, I want to just continue my experiences of traveling the world. So finding just projects in different regions in the world. So because this is like the greatest cultural experience you can have, right? A trip somewhere is cool, but doing a project in a different culture is just absolutely awesome. Because you really learn what a place is about and what people are about and so on. And and then there was this moment where actually Mark Kushner, after Architizer had really his financial challenges, he was a little bit without orientation, didn't know what to do, just got a second kid, took flying lessons, bought a big new car, and just basically tried to entertain himself. And then he was thinking to come back into the architecture firm. And but then very quickly realizing that over the years he was not really present. I had created a big presence, and also the design ideology, the forms, everything came from my side. And from one day to the other one, which came to a total surprise for me, he decided to split the firm. And it was incredible rocky. And this is something I thought we were well prepared through a partnership agreement, but they're just as good as people behind it, and he did not do all the right things. So rocky separation and tough to survive. So I thought many times that I go bankrupt and just lose everything that I had built for years. But then bringing in people who were my trusted partners. As partners, I had incredible connections to some of my clients, even one of them, Amos, out of Germany from iLive. I was like, Amos, I need $100,000 now. I know money is coming in, but I cannot pay people. And he was like, Matthias, no problem. He sent me 100,000 and was like, send it off, work it off through projects you do with me, right? So it was like, for me, an amazing experience of something which was very disruptive, but the kind of goodwill that I was able to build for so many years really paid off. And then I went through a whole exercise through advisors to review where we are, where we want to go. And Keith Yamashita is an amazing guy from SYP. He helped me a lot about what is the naming strategy. Do we switch names or stay with HWKN? That was an intentional decision to stay with it. But now it's without meaning, right? It's Hollwich and... but then also, how can you expand the business model of architecture? Because architecture is really tough because it's always based on fees and hours, right? And it's really difficult, right, to become profitable and make money on it. So can you be involved in equity deals in your architecture? Can you do productize things and so on? And so that was a real kind of refresh on all levels and re-energizing. And now the company is crystal clear what we do. We're doing 3 scopes. Basically, we do one where we do opportunity mapping, where we can be hired by a client who has a site or maybe an idea, and we can say, these are the both and the areas they can do, but we can do this now, future of work, new mixes of typologies, different elements that you bring in to create success for that place, which is super interesting because now suddenly we're hired to do master plans, we do visioning, and it really created a clear, unique sales proposition here. Then the second one is where we're doing new typologies and products. So we're working actually with Goldbeck, which is a prefab company for office buildings, and we're customizing these buildings now with a restrained design language to make them unique and special. And we're working on them as a new brand, which is called Spirit, with a developer in Aachen. We're doing sustainable light industrial buildings. They're called eco parks. We're doing a new residential brand that one for a client, which is called Diamond in Germany. We're doing our own residential brand, which is called Flex Live. We started a company and pursuing very strongly right now our own development options. And then the third one is unforgettable buildings. And so we don't do buildings, we do unforgettable buildings. And how you do that is actually, there's a science behind it, which is also really fun because it comes back to my math and physics kind of predictability that I need, is that we're combining basically contextual ideas in materials with emotions, which could be joy, and with uniqueness. And when you combine these 3 things together, it's scientifically proven that it actually intensifies your memory capabilities. So when we now design, we always look at these designs and we say, like, are they unforgettable? No, not yet. What do we change, right? So now it's not like, oh, we're designing cute, good-looking buildings. There's a real vision behind it. And when I present it to clients, I can always say, this is what we do and why we do it. And it became very clear, basically the North Star of any design and any design engagement, that then people understand and go with it. And ever since, now we're winning these projects. And recently we won this one project in London. Cannot tell you too much about it, but it is the most mind-blowing project imaginable. And it will take 5 more years until it's being built, but it's going to be like Wendy, like that level of project will be the one in London. And that is now basically my trajectory into the future. I want to grow the firm a little bit more, but not too much, right? 25, 35 maximum, stay there, try to increase further the profitability, right? Because we all, especially now since I have partners, it's important that we all make money and it's worth our time. Pushing further that we are a more aspirational firm. Right, like you hire Bjarke because he's an aspirational person. Now it's also like a business machine, but very early, right, he really figured that out. And when you do that, right, it helps you to do more ambitious projects. You can increase your fees. That all is part of a bigger plan. And post-Corona now, we figured out that we can do remote work. So now I decided with my partner that we always go for 1 month in the winter to a exotic location with heat. And in the winter and in the summer, we go maybe to Europe. And we did it this year with Ecuador. And it's just awesome because you're in a different country. I still have my computer. I do my work, but I experience new things. And I was always very interested in experiencing cultures in different locations. And now this is basically the trajectory where kind of highly ambitious projects with more predictability on income, with that compensating better the people who work for HWKN, and then being able to live the life I want by being also in different locations from time to time. That's kind of my future that I'm really pushing ahead with.
That's a killer summary and a killer feature. I'm very excited for you. I do have one last question to tack onto that, because you had mentioned that with some of these recent changes that, you know, work is coming in, you're getting people very interested in you guys. So do you think that's mostly because there's more structure behind what you're doing and you're able to present and clearly say, like, this is X, Y, and Z, this is what we do, and this is how we do it and why? Is that structure part of the reason?
Yeah, absolutely. People now know exactly what they get from us, right? It's not going to be a boring box. It's not going to be a crazy box. It's going to be something that is targeted, right? And also unforgettability. People just get it. They're like, why should I have a building that's forgettable, right? Yeah. But then it's not just because you want to make that people remember it. It actually enhances the leasing, it creating a stronger connection from the tenants later. It can increase for a office operator, like for a company, the HR retention. Yeah. Right. All of these things actually are kind of good strategies that make a building successful. And now we can describe it quickly, right? Unforgettable. And then I can also back it up with the buildings that we have done and also all the things that are right now on the drawing board. And I realized that is really what people enjoy. And then it's also 100% always about the enthusiasm that comes through the presentations and through the meetings. I've heard it from many people. We have a well-calibrated we are not overselling. We're presenting correctly what we do, but we're always doing that with joy and always with excitement. And when you have a client, right, you're going to hang out with this client for 5 years. Yeah, do you want to be with somebody who's like self-critical and self-absorbed or over egocentric? No, you want to have somebody you can relate to, you can have a beer with, and you can create something exceptional, but also when there's a problem that you can say, like, look, Matthias, we got to save some money here. Let's get real, right? And that I'm not like, oh, no. It's like, yes, of course. I understand you. Let's do it. Yeah. Like these kind of things are really crucial for just basically the culture of business that you also need to represent as your firm.
This has been fantastic. Matthias, thank you so much for coming on the show. We went past the time because this was so stimulating. We could continue this conversation for sure. Let's have you back on in the future. I'm very excited for you and everyone at HWKN, and congrats on the success, and let's see what happens. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're excited for you guys.
Yeah, I want to tell you all what happened now with London and all of these awesome projects and how it's just the beginning. I feel like it's the third phase of HWKN. So here we go.
Thank you for watching this video on YouTube. If you like what we're doing, then please subscribe to our show by hitting that subscribe button. You can also like the episode and leave comments. Let us know what you're thinking. Reach out to us via email at hellosecondstudiopod.com. You can also listen to us as a regular podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and pretty much all the other platforms. How else can they find us?
The hotline?
Hotline, which is 213-222-6950. Just shoot a text there and we can answer any questions. And you can find us on social media as well. Thanks for watching and see you soon.